How you doing?
Not so good.
Word has it you want to retire. Permanently.
You got it, Doc. They don't make football uniforms with one leg.
Yeah, you're right. Once you lose a leg, nothing works anymore. Your eyes, your mouth, your hands, your brain. Might as well chuck it all.
Don't try to con me. Playing ball was all I had. It's the only thing I know.
And without that, you're nothing.
Listen, I'm not stupid. I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to get me to stand on my own 2 feet. Well, I can't do that anymore.
Maybe you are stupid.
What?
Well, if you think all you can do is play football, you have a pretty narrow view of life. What were you going to do when you turned 40?
I was gonna look back on a great career.
Well, now you're going to have to look forward to something else.
Like what? The only thing I knew how to do was run.
You're still running, Billy. Only now you're running away.
Sergeant, have you got a minute?
What is it, Corporal?
Well, I got something I want to show you. It's Life magazine. There's an article in here on last year's Iowa-Minnesota game. Oh, I just got it. The mail's a little slow, you know. Look, there's a picture right here of you getting tackled.
Yeah. I was in the first quarter. Were they wiping us up?
Yeah, I know. I listened to that game on Armed Forces radio. Boy, what a finish. I was sitting there screaming, "Go Iowa! Go Tyler! Get him! Get him!"
That was one hell of a game. Minnesota had us stopped dead. What defense? We couldn't move up the middle, we couldn't go wide, and whenever we went to the bomb, they intercepted.
Yeah, I know. Iowa could hardly move the ball at all.
They had us stopped cold down to the last 2 minutes of the game. So, we went to the short pass, dumping quick ones just over the line. We slowly moved the ball down the field.
And then you dove over in the last 20 seconds.
It was those short passes that did it. It's always a way to beat them. You just have to keep trying till you find it.
Okay, quick show of hands. Who thinks Drew should go as Radar next Halloween? He could so totally pull that off. He'd have to get a tattoo of a teddy bear first. I don't think he has one of those. But anyway, I got picked the proverbial short straw to give you the message this morning, so here we go. All right. As many of you know, I've been doing communions for several years now, and you know that many of them, have you heard, they're pretty well related about 3 different topics: sports, history, and sports history. Well, for better or worse, this message won't be any different, so my apologies to anybody that is expecting anything else this morning. I have to confess, and probably as you guys already know, I'm a little bit of an addict when it comes to sports and sports statistics. Anybody remember the movie City Slickers? We're on the cattle drive, and the lady exclaims, who cares who played in Pittsburgh for third base for the Pittsburgh Pirates in 1960? And all 3 of the guys go, "Ooh, Don Hoke!" all simultaneously. It's like, that was me to a certain degree before life started happening. These types of facts became a little bit less important. So, but in the past, when I've done a communion, I've tried to relate it about someone or a specific team that has accomplished a specific goal, such as winning an Olympic gold medal or achieving a championship of some sort. All these stories about coming out on top are usually pretty cool, but this morning I'm going to kind of go a little bit of a different route because, as glorious as winning is in our society, sometimes it's the stories about the people that don't hoist the trophy that can be the most inspirational to us. It almost seems like ancient history now, but does anybody remember the Tour of Missouri bike race that went through Columbia a few years back? If you're on the route, you probably remember it finally from all the water bottles that got tossed into your yard. In short, this race is basically kind of like a miniature Tour de France, in that the Missouri race is only for like 6 or 7 days, whereas the Tour de France lasts for 3 weeks. When it was here, I volunteered to work a couple years of the race, and before the race would come to town, each host city or town would have a meeting to discuss each volunteer's role for that particular day. One of the things that I found kind of interesting when talking with the other volunteers of the race is that people just seemed astonished that cyclists came in teams and not just in individuals. I think that kind of the general population thought the consensus was that the cyclist rode solo, and it's kind of every man for himself. For those of you that are kind of unfamiliar with how a bike team works, it usually consists of about 6 to 9 riders, kind of depending on the length of the tour. The longer the tour, the more riders you have. And each team usually has its own lead man, the rider that they expect to compete for the best overall time. But they also have a couple riders that specialize in a certain skill, such as mountain climbing or sprints or time trials. The rest of this team consists of basically the support staff, if you will. The technical term for these guys is called domestiques. And they're the sacrificial lambs of the team, if you will. The best analogy I can give you to what these guys do is if you can remember back to the space shuttle launches where they had the 2 solid rocket boosters on each side of the launch. Well, the job of these boosters was to help propel the shuttle into orbit, and when they ran out of fuel, they simply dropped off. Domestiques do essentially the same thing. At the beginning of the race, 1 or 2 of them would be sent ahead to basically drive the pace of the race for that day and give the team leader someone to draft off of until the domestique gets tired. At that point, the job of the domestique is done for the day. The rider spent his fuel, and he goes back to the back of the pack to finish the rest of the day. However, just because his job is done doesn't mean his day is done. Completion of the task doesn't mean he can go back to the team bus and relax and, eat crumpets and drink tea or whatever cyclists eat. I don't know. But he has to press on. He has to continue through the completion of the stage in order to compete the next day. Most of these stages go on for 100 miles or better. So if you're as a rider and if your day is done halfway through a stage, it gives you an awful lot of time to reflect on whether expending all this energy is worth it. The convenience store chain 7-Eleven sponsored an American cycling team for the 1988 Tour de France. To me, it's kind of funny because when you think of 7-Eleven, the first thing that pops into your mind isn't professional cycling. It's like Slurpees and roller dogs. So anyway, but on that team, there's a 25-year-old domestique from Denmark named Jens Vegerby. Vegerby made it through the first 2 weeks of the stage relatively unscathed. However, the 15th stage of the race took the riders through a particularly steep part of the Pyrenees Mountains in southern France. To look at a topographical map of this particular stage, it looked like a row of shark's teeth with several mountain climbs on this particular day. Somewhere during a climb called the Tourmalet, Vegerby took a tumble. The crash shook him up quite badly. Somehow he managed to summon enough strength to get back on his bike and continue. Bleeding badly from the right thigh and fighting the effects of dehydration, Vegerby continued to fight the hill, even though the leaders of the race were already 10 miles ahead of him. At this point, he must entertain some thought of dropping off himself, because once he climbed this mountain, he had yet another mountain to climb to complete the stage. It's going to take a supreme effort and a lot of help just to finish. I'd be willing to bet we've all felt that way from time to time. Our lives are so full of these tasks that take a tremendous amount of time and effort in order for us to complete. We may achieve one particular goal and be able to come up for air just long enough to see another one in the near horizon. It probably feels that more often than not, rather than one after the other, these obstacles more or less come in bunches. The Scripture is full of examples of people that probably felt a lot pretty similar to the way we do. To me, the one figure that stands out to me is Joshua. And to give you a little short recap on Joshua, Joshua was basically one of Moses' right-hand men or generals as they left Egypt and headed toward the Promised Land. He'd led them out of Egypt across the desert, but the Israelites weren't allowed to go any farther because of their lack of faith in God. Moses wound up dying in the wilderness, and Joshua gets his job as the next leader of the nation of Israel. So here's a guy, if he would have buckled under the weight of all the pressure and expectations that are laid upon him, I can't say that I blame him one bit. Look at what he was up against. First, he had to contend with the Canaanites. The majority of the spies that went over to into Canaan the first time, whenever Moses commanded them to do so, came back to Moses and said, this land is occupied by giants. There's absolutely no way we can go in there and defeat them. They were bigger, they were stronger, and their cities were fortified with really high walls. On top of that, they were particularly violent people who had no interest in knowing who God was. Second of all, you had the Israelites themselves. Despite being led out of Egypt by Moses, despite seeing the Egyptian army completely wiped out in front of them in the Red Sea, and despite being provided for on a daily basis on 40 years in the wilderness, the Israelites continued to be rebellious against God and fearful of what awaited them in the Promised Land. They saw themselves as mere grasshoppers as compared to the Canaanites. They had forgotten God's promises to them, and their penance was that generation was to never enter the Promised Land, and they wound up dying in the desert. And number three, he was handpicked by God to be the leader of his nation. Can you imagine the look on this guy's face whenever he got chosen by God? It had to have been a lot like the look I gave Travis when he said I was going to give this message today. But anyway, how could anyone fill Moses' shoes? Moses had led the nation of Israel out of bondage of Egypt and on the verge of entering the Promised Land. As even a greater leader as Moses was, even he was threatened by his own people to be stoned. So if Moses couldn't get him across the Jordan, how could he be expected to do so? So after 40 years in the desert, you think Joshua was up for the task? Let's go to Joshua chapter 1, verses 1 through 9 and find out. In verse 1 we read, After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place that you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Now you might get the impression after reading a passage like this that God just handpicked Joshua basically because he was gifted or blessed with some kind of superhuman ability of some sort. But the reality is Joshua is much like you and I. He was someone who entertained his own doubts about being in his fitness to be able to lead. Being a head football coach and leading your team of 80 plus so football players on the football field on a Saturday afternoon is one thing. Getting a nation of 2 million plus people to buy into going to battle in a land of giants is something completely different. It was his faith in God during all those years in the wilderness that got him the job whenever Moses died. When the Israelites first reached the Jordan River, Joshua was one of only 2 spies, with Caleb being the other, that were originally sent to check the area before the Israelites were supposed to cross the Jordan the first time, and came back with a good report. The other 10 came back saying there's absolutely no way that we could defeat the Canaanites. They're just too big. Interestingly enough, the 2 spies that Joshua had sent over into Canaan for the second time came back with the exact same report that Joshua gave Moses 40 years earlier. Still, Joshua had a little bit of doubt in the back of his own mind. But if you look at verses 3 and 4 again, it says God is saying to Joshua, hey man, this deal's done. All you have to do is cross the river. That's it. I'll take care of the rest. Later on in Joshua chapter 1, it describes his plight to bring God's plan to the tribal leaders of Israel. And where they had declined his invitation earlier, they accepted God's command to enter this time. The nation enters, takes down the walls of Jericho with a very unconventional military plan, and the rest, they say, is history. You know, we all have our own personal obstacles or mountains that we have to contend with pretty well on a daily basis. We all get over the top of an obstacle, and then there's another one just waiting for us shortly thereafter. It's not a matter of if we'll face adversity, but when. We all got it. We're going to face it eventually. You know, if you have a pulse, you can't help but feel your blood pressure go up at least 20 to 30 points every day you turn the news on anymore. Problems are everywhere. Internationally, domestically, locally, you name it, it's out there. And to complicate things, we got so many different media outlets in which the news is coming from, it's hard to discern where exactly the truth is coming from. All that mess doesn't even include our personal aspects of our daily lives that compound our stress. Job or school-related issues, personal or family-related illnesses, death in the family, financial issues, personal relationships with family and friends, middle school, all of which have some kind of impact on all of us. With that kind of weight placed on us, it's just amazing. It's amazing that we just don't all topple over like a row of dominoes. So what do? Well, the first thing we got to do, we got to make a decision. How are we going to allow the actions and events of the world to affect us? Well, the first decision, it really boils down to two choices. We can either A, we can let the world have its way with us and we can crumple up into a little ball, or B, we can refuse to let the world get us down, even though the odds are stacked up against us. I get it. Trying to get to that point where you can make a definitive decision can take a lot of time, maybe way more than we would like it to. Now, if you chose option B, then kudos to you. Just getting to that decision alone can be a grind in itself. Now that you made the decision, then what? I think we need to realize that no matter how much we would like to rely on our own instinct and intellect, we just weren't meant to go through life alone. God knew that when he was addressing Joshua. Jesus understood that when he was addressing the disciples for the last time. If he thought we could go it alone, why did he send us the Holy Spirit in the first place? I think the next part of the journey is kind of a three-parter. First of all, we kind of have to know where to look. I mean, we have all these different kind of outlets, and we can pick and choose all kinds of different directions in which we can go for answers and support. But until we start looking up on a regular basis, I don't think we can even begin to experience the strength and courageousness that Joshua sought and received. Until we can develop a closer relationship with God through daily meditation, we definitely can't see where he's guided us in the past, and we sure have no sense of direction of where we're going in the future. Second of all, it's be good to try to remember his promises. Think of all the promises that he said he would provide. I mean, he's given us the promise of eternal life to all that will accept him. I think in the context of this message, perhaps equally as important is that he's promised never to leave us or forsake us, no matter what. He promises this not only back in verses 5 and 9, but again in Matthew 28:20, and again in Hebrews 13:5. A promise that good is apparently worth repeating over and over again, because the more you hear it, the more it resonates with you and becomes a part of you. And finally, I think we all need to kind of look back and recall some times in which we've had problems in the past, and he's been there for us. Joshua witnessed these accounts firsthand with the past victories that were possible when tasks were handled with God's lead. I would be willing to bet that whatever obstacle you guys are encountering, if you're encountering one right now, is probably not the first one you've ever endured. Take a moment and just reflect on the times in the past that you were struggling, and then remember if you sought God's help and were trying to get through those trials. Chances are pretty good that those times that you sought God's help probably went a little bit smoother than times you told God, you know what, I think I got this one. I'll take this one by myself. So when being told, there's kind of a misconception out there, I think, that, when being told to be strong and courageous, that it's accompanied by a feeling, by some kind of internal feeling, some kind of good vibe, some warm, tingly kind of feeling. But, when the time comes to do that, we don't feel very strong, and you sure don't feel very courageous. God told Joshua that he was going to give him a feeling, God didn't tell Joshua that he was going to give him a feeling of strength and courage. However, he commanded him to have strength and courage. Joshua wasn't allowed to have feelings of inadequacy, and neither are we. Inadequacy just distracts us from the purpose that God has set for us. You know, our journey towards gaining strength and courage, of course, starts and revolves around God. But however, that doesn't mean we should discount everything and everyone else along the way. You know, as we mentioned earlier, we weren't meant to carry the burden alone. Joshua not only had God on his side, but he had Caleb to help him to complete his mission. Sometimes that sense of, or the source of encouragement can be someone close to you, but sometimes it can come from a very unexpected source. As Jens Vegerby struggled up his mountain climb, spectators alongside the road began to push him from behind so he could get him up the hill. There's a tradition amongst the French spectators at the Tour de France to help struggling cyclists as long as they have the will to continue to push the pedals. On that day, Vegerby got help from people he didn't even know. And the chances are excellent he would never meet them. They were mere faces in the crowd. But without them, he doesn't finish that day. Vegerby eventually did finish that day and did finish the whole tour. I'm not really sure what the more impressive feat for him was that day, the fact that he finished the stage at all, or he actually finished ahead of 13 other riders. I think that's kind of where we come in. We don't have to look any farther probably than the confines of this room to find somebody that might be lacking in strength and courage right now. If that feeling exists in here, just think for a moment what it's like outside these walls. We're here to extend strength and encouragement not just to everyone here and to fellow Christians, but to everyone. Simply put, we're here to be God's domestiques. An interesting fact, you want to know the English translation of domestique? Simply put, it's servant. To kind of sum up today's message, I kind of found this saying that pretty well sums it up like this. Our strength does not come from our own power, but rather from God's promises. Our courage does not come from our own pride, but rather from God's presence. This morning's clip came from the all-time best TV show ever, MASH. That's non-negotiable. Hey. And in the clip, a wounded soldier / pro football hopeful running back, Billy Tyler, comes into the 407-7th with a severely injury to his right leg. Despite Hawkeye's best efforts, he's unable to save the leg and has to amputate. Feeling that there's no sense in going on, Tyler asks for some medication to commit suicide. After Radar shows up with an issue of Life magazine, Tyler recalls in the game in which it seemed that all was lost. But with a little change in game plan, his team eventually won. Tyler also came to the realization that with a little help, all is not lost just because you face what initially looks like an insurmountable obstacle. That's the kind of help that God gives us, and that's the kind of help that we need to give one another. That little bit of encouragement, it may come from some gentle words like Radar gave to Billy Tyler. That encouragement may come in the form of a firm shove from an unexpected source, like the French did for Jens Vegerby. Or you could just use my old man's approach and use a good swift kick to the backside. I wouldn't recommend that, of course, but however you do it, we need to be mindful of the words that God spoke to Joshua, because those words delivered to him are every bit as pertinent today as they were 3,300 or some odd years ago. This is our time of invitation. This time the musician is going to come forward. Mike's going to come up and take any invitations if anybody wants to come talk. I'm going to exit stage left. But anyway, just to remember, when we're faced with a task that seems to be too heavy for us to carry, we're commanded to put aside our own feelings and approach them with the same strength and confidence that Joshua had. With God's promise and His presence, we always have the strength and confidence to handle the trials that life throws at us. End of story. So if you've made a decision, I'm going to invite you to come down, because if you're struggling with a decision or whatnot, I ask you not to delay, because you know what happened to the Israelites whenever they wavered on their decision. So if you have a decision, don't waver. Let's talk as we stand and sing.